So, how do we deal with emotion in Christianity? Not well, is my answer. And as we deal in a season of cultural trauma where we've all been through this massive trauma of COVID and 9/11 and are experiencing Ukraine and all these things. And then for many of us, COVID has been close in death to friends and family members. How do we deal with emotion and do it better? And how did Jesus demonstrate dealing with emotion in the Bible that I think Christians just miss because Christians don't know the Bible? Let's talk about it on Pastor Paul's Bible Talk. So we're here on our weekly or sub-weekly, bi-weekly, every other week Bible Talk. And today I'm going to talk about something that's very real and very close to me in this season. And that is dealing with deep emotions. The church does not do it well. And I'll tell you what happened. Recently, I was given a diagnosis in therapy that I'll be talking more about in the coming weeks as I really feel my way through and feel I have something safe to share out of that diagnosis. But what's really interesting is what my therapist told me in working with me in that diagnosis. And he said, I've worked with a number of patients, and he gave me a number who have this diagnosis. He said, but I really want to work with you. And I thought, wow, I'm special because my therapist really wants to work with me. And he says, I really want to work with you because out of all of those patients I've worked with this diagnosis, you're the only man. All the others have been women. Now, that raises two possibilities. Either women are just more emotional and much less able to handle the hardships of life, which you complementarianists out there might agree with and be deadly, terribly wrong. Or men are taught to not deal in emotions, to stuff it, to be a man, to be tough, or what they're taught is just give it to Jesus. Just let Jesus give you grace for others. And I think that's more of what it is. Men are taught you're not allowed to have emotion. Christianity doesn't like to deal with emotion at all to begin with. We're either taught to stuff it by take it to Jesus at the cross, or we're taught that it's wrong and we should be ashamed of feeling emotions. And for men, we're taught, well, just go out and shoot something in the forest and you'll feel better. Just go play basketball or something. And so what do? We self-harm, we harm others, we harm our children, as some of us have experienced. We put deep trauma on our kids because Christianity teaches us very unhealthy ways of dealing with the pain of human emotions. We rarely teach human emotions are right and real. And mostly we're taught that human emotions are human, therefore bad and wrong. I even have a guy on my page telling me he calls it psycho-heresy for a Christian to go to a psychiatrist, which my father, who recently passed away, used to teach that psychiatry was in opposition to Christianity. And so we have raised up generations of really emotionally unwell people who have abused, even SA'd their children, even ritually SA'd their children. And we continue to say, cover it up. It's their business. Let's deal with it in-house, which was the story of my household. And if the children get abused, well, they can just buck up and take it to the cross and Jesus will help. And I think it's a terrible way. And I want to share in the Bible Talk today that it's nothing like who Jesus displayed an actualized human being to be. Jesus was very, very good at feeling his emotions, very, very good at displaying those emotions, and also very, very good at setting boundaries, even on his mother, who happened to be the Virgin freaking Mary. So let's look at the Bible and share with this a little bit. And so I say this, and my teaching on this is because many of you, as you've heard me start to process what's happening in my life and in the life of my household, have said, wow, your story sounds so much like mine. And it's so freeing and affirming to hear I'm not alone. So let's start with sharing that. So we see 3 different times where Jesus dealt with something from his mother that he said, I'm putting a boundary here. I'm sorry, I'm putting a boundary on this. And so one of them that I see is when Jesus was in Jerusalem. His parents had taken him there. He was probably about 12 years old, and the parents were leaving. And of course, the families traveled in caravans. There was no such thing as traditional family, as James Dobson tries to impose our white culture on the world. There was no such thing as a traditional family in Jesus' day. There were caravans of communities that traveled together. And so Jesus' family left Jerusalem with no idea that Jesus wasn't with them. And so they were traveling for a couple of days, and they all of a sudden realized, like, where's Jesus? And realized he wasn't there. And so Mary and Joseph had to travel back to Jerusalem to find Jesus. And they found him in the temple having deep discussions with the church leaders there. And so this is what happens then when Jesus' parents, who rightly were upset and frazzled, and they had lost their child. And so this is the interaction that Jesus had with his parents. It says, when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother, the Virgin Mary, says to Jesus, Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress. And Jesus said to them, his father Joseph and his mother, the Virgin Mary, he says, why are you looking for me? Did you know did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? Jesus said, you are not allowed to take me away from doing what is my purpose and what I was born to do. And it's something that I want to tell people in this audience today, particularly if you have a loved one who passes away, a parent, somebody that you had a difficult relationship with. You get to put a boundary there and say, there's real pain and I am angry at my parents. So if Jesus can say to his mom, what are you upset at me about? You don't get to be upset about me at this moment because I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You can say whatever emotion is brought up by the loss of a parent or somebody who did not treat you well. No speaking ill of the dead, honor your mother and father, all of those things. You get to feel your emotions. And if family members are still alive and still around and want to do those, you get to build boundaries just as Jesus was willing to build boundaries with his mom. We see this at the wedding, where the wedding ran out of wine, and Jesus is there, and all of a sudden they run out of wine. And it says in John chapter 2, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus, the Virgin Mary, said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. So do you see, we just see the trend here that Jesus, even with his mother, was willing to put up a boundary and say, I'm not beholden to you just because you're my parent. It is really important to know that you get to feel the real emotions around your parents and say, I don't have to live with this need to take care of my parents. See, the problem with an abusive, toxic, unhealthy household growing up is the child becomes responsible to maintain the well-being of the parent. And in my household, where my dad was a pastor of a Protestant denomination, protecting the reputation of my father became the job of each of the children and the mother in the household. A child is not required to maintain the well-being of a parent. And we see this in the Bible, where even Mary says, how could you treat us this way? And Jesus says, I'm not treating you any way at all. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm not responsible for your well-being. We see this again in Mark, and this is a story that's in 3 of the 4 Gospels, and it's a place where Jesus is teaching and hanging out with his followers and disciples. And it says in Mark chapter 3, Jesus' mother and brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him, and a crowd was sitting around Jesus, and they said to him, your mother and brothers are outside seeking you. And Jesus answered them, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking around at those who sat around him, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother. So from a white Christian culture, we would read this passage and say, wow, Jesus is incredibly disrespectful of his mom. What a jerk kid. Honor your mother and father, Jesus. But then we're trapped with our inerrancy of, we have to say, well, if Jesus did it, it must be okay. And I don't think Jesus was being disrespectful of his mom. We hear in some of the descriptions and writings of the Bible that Jesus' mother and brothers had become concerned about his ministry. We see this in the story of Jesus reading his mission statement of coming to set the captives free in Nazareth. And the people are amazed at what they hear Jesus saying. They feel something in what he's saying to them. And then all of a sudden they go, wait a second. This is Jesus, the son of Joseph, the brother of these guys. And instantly his credibility was taken away, and they were going to throw him off a cliff if he hadn't become invisible, been able to walk through the crowd. And we see that Jesus then did his ministry, not in Nazareth, where he was from, not in Bethlehem, where he theoretically was born, but mostly in Capernaum and areas like that, and even to the Samaritans, because those who knew him and were familiar with him could not see him as a teacher with credibility. So here come his mom and his brothers, and perhaps they have heard that Jesus is hanging out with sinners and winebibbers, that the religious establishment is upset with him, and they've come to get him to fix him and set him right. And Jesus says, that's not my mom. Those aren't my brothers. My brothers and sisters are the ones who believe in me, who champion me. Was Jesus dishonoring his mother and father by saying, that's not my family? Are you required to continue to maintain the well-being of your parents and your family and your spiritual community at the cost of yourself? I can tell you from personal experience, at the passing of a family member, a lot comes around of people with good advice, like Job's friends had for him. Like, you've got to go make it right before your dad passes away. For one, that then is superseding the idea that life goes on after death. But it also becomes this idea of, don't speak ill of the dead. Your job continues to be to maintain the well-being and reputation of people around you who should have been intent on taking care of your well-being. Every human being needs safety, value, and purpose. When I do my coaching with people, I ask, from where in life do you get your safety, value, and purpose? What does your identity look like? And whenever I work with somebody, and with children coming out of this boomer generation, it's almost universally a mess. Where did you get your safety, value, and purpose? Well, quite often it was the child's responsibility to provide that to the parent, not vice versa. And that creates an unjust world where the child has to create a space of safety and value and purpose. And how a child does that in their mind is says, well, my parents can't be bad, so I must be bad. I'll choose to think of, if I am just better, this unjust world won't be unjust anymore. And that mentality has long-term consequences on human beings. And as somebody who's carrying a diagnosis from my therapy that I'm working through, and again, I'm going to be sharing more about as time goes on, I can tell you men are almost never allowed to delve into what that pain and injury looks like. And therefore they carry the pain of the shame of that undiagnosed for their whole life. And many end up in prison or unaliving themselves, because they just don't have anywhere to put the pain. Jesus built boundaries around his mother. He also built boundaries around friends. When Peter said, no, you're not going to go to Jerusalem and die, Jesus turned to Peter, who just a few verses earlier in Matthew 16, he had said, wow, Peter, you're amazing. You heard from heaven. I'm going to change your name. You're so incredible. He turned around to that same Peter and said, hey, get behind me, Satan. Jesus knew when to build boundaries around family members and friends. Jesus knew how to suffer anger. He knew how to be angry. We see in the Easter story, as Easter's coming up, that Jesus comes into Jerusalem, I think on a Sunday. I think I have this right, or maybe it's Monday. He's headquartered in Bethany, but he walks into Jerusalem. He goes into the temple. He looks around, sees what's going on in the temple, leaves, goes back to Bethany where he's hanging out for the night, and the next day goes straight to the temple after cursing the fig tree, saying, any group of people that doesn't bear fruit needs to be cut off at the roots and thrown in the fire. He walks into the temple and begins to overturn money tables and create havoc, and then stops in the middle of it all, takes rope, crafts it together as a whip, and starts swinging it around. And I think at that moment, Jesus was pissed. Oh, Jesus was kind, walking around all the time with a halo saying, bless you, brother. No, he was pissed that the religious system was putting a bondage of religious law onto people. And I tell you, evangelicals, if Jesus was incarnate on earth today, he'd be walking into your churches, honestly make a point that you guys are pissing me off. And he might even say the S word or drop an F-bomb, which Christians hate much worse than children suffering. Christians are much more incensed when you say the word shit than they are when you point out that children out there are suffering because they've lost their ability to be human beings through their indoctrination of their beliefs. Jesus processed anger and he processed pain. We see again and again in the book of Mark, they're looking for Jesus. They can't find him anywhere. And they say, finally, they find him. And they're like, where have you been? People are looking for you. You've got a chance to be famous, Jesus. What are you doing hanging out here in the dark all night long? And Jesus is like, man, if I'm not out here praying, you guys are going to get to me. You guys are going to make me do something that I'm not supposed to do. So I have to have my identity intact. When I coach people, my well-being and emotional and spiritual well-being coaching, it is all about knowing your identity. And so Jesus would go out, I believe, and he would be on the side of the mountain and saying, God of heaven, this is not working. These people are freaking nuts. Is there another way? And then it tells us in Hebrews, loud wails and cries, he cried out for help for the one who could save him from death. And it says he was heard because of his piety. He knew where to take the case. Jesus demonstrates for us that feeling grief, feeling anger, feeling pain, letting it wail out is how we are supposed to live. And any Christian who is telling you, just take it to the cross, just take it to the cross, brother. You don't need no psychiatry. Just take it to the cross, is not teaching you what Jesus demonstrated is the way to live as a follower of Christ. What happened when Jesus heard that his friend Lazarus has died? Maybe the most important verse in all of the Bible. It says Jesus wept. He was brokenhearted. If you believe he was the incarnate God in the flesh, he may have even known that Lazarus was going to be raised from the dead. If you're a Calvinist, you certainly believe that. And so the fact that he would stop and cry and it would be chronicled in the Bible should tell every Christian that feeling your emotions is super, super important. He was angry. He wept. So I'm walking a life journey. I've lost my Christian community. My family is iffy on me at best. I'm working through some life therapy issues, and I'm doing it all publicly. And the question I get asked at times is, why are you doing it so publicly? And some will even put rather nefarious intentions on me doing so. And I've received permission to share this from somebody that sent me a message, and I want to tell you why this is important that you hear what I said today. That Jesus processed real emotion in very emotional ways. Particularly you men need to hear this, because you're the ones told you don't get to be emotional. Just go shoot a gun and be okay. I'm not going to say the name of this person, but it's a man who sent me a message, and he said this in hearing me process about my father's death. He said, I want to tell you how much your story about grieving over your father touched me. I lost my abusive dad over 20 years ago, and not a day goes by that I don't think about him. Not a day goes by that I don't consider myself a terrible son for carrying around the anger as I do. Not a day goes by that I don't worry that I'm passing on to my two children the kind of toxic, ugly masculinity and angry masculinity that I grew up around. I just wanted to tell you that I love you as a Christian brother, and I support you, and I appreciate your mission. What you are doing is outstanding. And then he shared a poem. And I hope it's okay, my friend, that I read this poem. This is why it's important for us to know that Jesus drew boundaries, that he expressed emotion, that he processed real human emotion, and he cared about real human emotion, is because you and I need to learn to live the same way despite bad teaching we're getting from our churches. So this is the poem my friend sent me in support of that message. It's called My Father's Fear. He told me the Russians are coming, that Armageddon armies were amassing in the Middle East. He believed the Antichrist was giving orders as we spoke, planning the bonfires where newborns ripped from their mother's womb will roast. His snub-nosed .38 revolver purchased at a pawn shop where he traded 4 crates of records, and all of his fishing gear lay loaded in the nightstand drawer, ready to kill any midnight intruder. Child molesters cruised small town alleyways in bands with sliding doors oiled to make abduction easier. That Halloween, he poured out my candy on the kitchen table to search for razor blades and heroin-laced pixie sticks. A hurricane churning in the Gulf had turned our way, so we evacuated late, despite the pounding rain. And when the family dog, a mongrel mutt I loved more than my own life, sprung from my arms, gripped by fear to flee into the night, I burst into tears, and my father shoved me into the back seat and leveled his fingers at me like that gun. "Shut up crying," he said. "No son of mine is a goddamn sissy." Are these the young men we want to raise? Are these the mindsets we want to protect in our churches? These mindsets that provide the need for a child to medicate and protect their parents rather than vice versa, and the reputations of the men of God to be protected at all cost. No son of mine. We've got to break this down. This is why I do emotional, spiritual well-being coaching. This is why I find that so much more vital and so much more satisfying than traditional pastoring, where we just preach a sermon and people come in and out of the church completely unchanged day by day. We've got to be willing to hear, be humble-hearted to hear and know that life is moving and culture is changing, and we have to know what is good and right and the purpose of God in a season, as we're commanded to do in Romans 12:2. And the way we know to do that is by allowing ourselves to be transformed by the ongoing renewing of our mind, rather than being conformed to the indoctrination of the era and the bubble in which we live. And I think this is a season. I think what right-wing Christianity has done, what Trumpism has done, what MAGAism has done, the blessing of it all, it has ripped the lid off of right-wing Christianity in the white evangelical church and is showing us the massive hypocrisy and dark, hardened heart underneath. And all of us are being asked to choose. Do you want to be that? Or do you want to be a follower of Christ? Do you want to be a Christian who carries a name but doesn't look much like Jesus? Or would you rather be a follower of Christ? And a humble heart is required as a part of that, to have eyes to see and ears to hear. And a humble heart sometimes means stopping and saying, particularly you men, I am hurting. I am not okay. And the church will tell you, oh, you're hurting, therefore your message is invalid. If you're hurting, you shouldn't be speaking out. And I'm telling you today, I'm hurting, and I'm speaking out because I'm tired of the church crushing other people for doing very human and normal things. You are amazing. You are fearfully and wonderfully made, the Bible says. You are an eternal being seated with Christ in heavenly realms. And I would put it into these terms. I ask the question of all of my coaching clients: are you good, and do you deserve good things to happen in your life? The church teaches us, no, you are not good, and you are not worthy of anything good. And you can just hope that through becoming a Christian and going to the right church and understanding the right theology, God might do something nice for you. He might even do a miracle if you really, really try really, really hard. But I want to tell you, I believe the universe has brought something together in you that is inherently good, capable of doing amazing things. All it takes is someone to tell you, no, this is who you are, and start to work through that process with you. If I can help you on that journey, go to my website, pastor-paul.com, send me a message, and we'll figure out how to work together in that. We got to change this. We're seeing how that angry, dark-hearted, terrible Christianity is impacting our culture. Those of us who are willing to be humble and be broken and allow our identity and our mindset to be turned and recreated, we get to be the ones to pass on to the next generation the opportunity to build something new. Isaiah 27, I hope I got that right, says, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it?" And Romans 12:2 says, the way you perceive the new thing that's happening in a season, the right thing that's happening in a season, is by continually being transformed by the ongoing renewing of your mind, by turning against your era and your echo chamber and saying, I want to see what is new, the new wineskin that we're using to move the kingdom of heaven forward in the season. And I believe wholly that emotional and spiritual well-being is right at the heart of that. And anybody who tells you different, I stand in direct opposition with those people, just as I believe Jesus did with the same people who want to put religious bondage on you rather than celebrate you and help you walk through to wholeness and healthiness. My goal in life is to tell people God is not mad at you. And when you understand that, you will live up to your better self and find a life that is fulfilling, powerful, and sustainable, transforming the world around you. Yes, Jesus was hurt by the church. Yes, he was angry at the church. Yes, he built boundaries around his own mother, the Virgin Mary. We get to do the same so that we can walk in amazing healthiness and not the unhealthiness that many of us experienced in our traumatic Christian upbringings. And I use Christian in quotes. And I bless you to be on that journey. And I share with you that I am on that journey with you. Thanks for being with me today. If you love what I do, the free content I provide, go to my website, pastor-paul.com. You can sign up for free for my update newsletter, do all kinds of cool things, and even give a little support if you would be willing, hopeful, and able to do so. So please just go to my website. If you say, man, I want to help Paul continue to do what he does, just go check out the website, pastor-paul.com, and see how we can connect and interact. Love you guys. Have a great weekend.